Welcome back to Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. Hello, listeners. How are you today out there in the listening world? We are here on the other side of your podcast, wherever you're listening, and thinking of you and wondering how your inner life is and how your inner work is going and how your beautiful life is shaping up. We're here for you, and we want to have a conversation with you. But Laurel and I are here to have a conversation, and you're invited in. So, hi, Laurel. How are you?
I'm well. How are you today, Laurel?
I'm doing well. I want to announce our topic right away, and I have some really interesting thoughts coming in, like almost like a little streaming channeling kind of thing. So I'm super excited to talk about this today. Our topic is, we're calling it the transformational R, which is taking responsibility for your life. And it's a big topic, isn't it, Laurel?
It is. And it's one of many transformational R's, but probably the one that makes the biggest difference in your life.
Yes, yes. Responsibility. I love this word because I remember at the beginning when I was looking at like reactive behavior versus responsive behavior, and kind of translating it into this idea of responsibility, right? The idea of responding to the world around us, and bringing it in internally as an ability that we have, right? Just like breaking that word down and playing with it a little bit is fun in and of itself.
I've never really thought about it that way, about it
Yeah.
is how it's our ability to respond.
Yes, yes. And rather than, oftentimes we think of, I think we've been groomed in our culture to think of responsibility, or for some reason in our culture, we take responsibility as a heaviness, like a burden. Oh, it's a responsibility to do that versus, I get to respond to this.
Well, and that's exactly what I was thinking about before you even talked about the breakdown of the word. But, what comes up for me in responsibility, my reaction or my response to responsibility has changed over my lifetime, right? Think
Yeah,
about,
yeah,
I don't know if this is true for you or our listeners, but maybe teenage years. I couldn't wait for responsibility.
yeah.
There were so many things I was looking forward to that I could be, have that independence and authority that goes with having responsibility for my life. I was so eager to do that. Right.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
there are times in my life, or have been times in my life, when the responsibility that I feel is heavy.
yeah, yeah. I think that I've always thought of myself as like very early on, as young, even as a young child, like being overly responsive, being an overly responsible child. And so now, like looking back at my life and seeing who I am, it was because how I was responding to what was going on around me was, I felt like I wanted to change it. I wanted to make it better, whatever. And so my response was to what I was doing was really stepping outside what was I was responsible for. And so I started to feel overly responsible. And but it was choice ultimately, but I didn't realize that then, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So our history being of our relationship with responsibility, it's a great journey to start to break down and look at as you think about creating your beautiful life, making changes that you want to make. Like, what is your relationship with responsibility? Is it a good word? Is it a bad word? How are your feelings around all of that? How do you define it even? It's an interesting exploration to
It
begin.
really
Yeah.
is. It
Hmm.
really is. There's so
Yeah.
many good journaling prompts that come to mind when I think about those questions, right?
I know. So, listeners, you might want to have a pen and paper if you want to put us on pause and come back, because I do think that we're going to end up having a lot of suggestions throughout the our conversation today of ideas, just right from the get go. So, you already have a few right now, which is,
Yeah.
what has your relationship with that word responsibility been? How would you even define it for yourself? Right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And another one that comes to mind is, when you're feeling burdened maybe or heavy from responsibility, I think that the analysis, the evaluation is what's weighing me down, my responsibility. Right?
Yes.
I think sometimes we
Yes.
when we tend to take responsibility or overtake responsibility, take on
Mhm.
things that aren't really ours, that those are the things that, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back when all of a sudden we have too much responsibility or too many things we feel responsible for, not
Yeah.
realizing that we've chosen almost all of those.
Yeah, I know that was my case, growing up. It was feeling like I was responsible for other people, particularly other people's happiness, which thankfully I know now everybody's responsible for their own happiness, and I cannot make anybody happy, which is such a relief to know. But early on, I didn't know that, and I really did believe that I could do and help and create situations that were going to make people happy. And yeah, it's good to know that that's not the case.
Yeah.
It took a lot of responsibility off my shoulders when I realized that. Yeah.
I mean, I too have gone through times like that, wanting
Mm,
people to be happy or wanting wanting them to experience ease, things that, how can I help? How can I take some of what is theirs and weighing them down? And,
yeah.
then there's likability, right? It's
Yeah.
if I'm helpful, you know, people need me and like me. And that
Yeah.
gets into a whole other topic about
Yeah.
responsibilities that aren't ours to take.
Right, right. And I know my personal relationship to that was if people like me, they won't reject me. And that's probably if I go like if we all have kind of a root fear, I think, and mine is fear of rejection. So, to be the person who is likable and needed, I'm not going to get rejected, right?
Yeah.
So Laurel, I really want to get to what was streaming in. And I know we have a lot of places we can talk about today, but was coming in like really strongly for me. And I think it actually came up in one of our podcasts, one of the last times we were talking. And I don't know if I ever said anything about it, but it was the idea of I feel like I was a person with a high need for control. And that related to becoming overly responsible. And that led to, I feel like, complications and problems and inner work that I had to do to kind of clean up where that was making my life unhappy. And yet, on the other side of the coin, it maybe had to do with shadow work. We were talking a little bit about shadow
Yeah.
work last time, right? On the other side of the coin is for somebody who has a high need for control to know that you can take responsibility for your own life and your own inner state, right? And have the opportunity to transform life by transforming yourself gives me, I'll speak personally, right? For somebody with a high need for control, like that gives me a lot of satisfaction. That if I take responsibility for my life and my inner state, I can affect change the most powerful way. I go, wow, well, I just now that's only up to me. And I can do that if I want to, right?
Yes. And, the piece in there that I think is so true, that when we see how much control we really have to create the life we want, to
Yeah.
respond to the life around us, right? We have control over those things and we can shape our lives by managing and being in
Yeah.
control of our choices, our thoughts, our
Yeah.
reactions. And
Yeah.
I think it reminded me of, in The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown, one of the things she talks about is powerlessness, right?
Mm,
And power really being our ability to affect change, right?
yeah.
So when you
Yeah.
think, you know, it shows up as taking responsibility for your life, but it really puts you in in the power seat
Right.
of your life.
Yes, yes. And that, when I think back to my a sense of feeling really sad early on in life, it did relate to feeling a sense of powerlessness because I didn't know how to respond and I didn't feel in control of things and I was trying to do it in ways that were ineffective, right? And and yeah, so this idea of taking responsibility does feel like you gain your power back internally, and you begin to see the situation through new lens and new perspective of whatever it
Ab-
is that you're struggling with. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I bet if we had time to unravel that link between powerlessness and the need for control, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
that I can see that having happened, for me in my life at times when I really felt powerless and what I was able to take control of. And sometimes then we take too much control, right? Too
Mm-hmm.
much responsibility, and
Yeah.
we overdo it. So I love
Yeah.
this, kind of this circle of taking responsibility that really does create goodness.
Yeah. And transformation, the kind of
Yeah.
transformation that you ultimately are seeking. And
Mm.
one of the things I want to draw into our conversation here too is, and I feel like you were kind of skirting around it, is this idea of um, you know being able to affect our emotional state as
Mm.
well, and how this sense of feeling powerless, right? I know for me, right, that led to a lot of sadness and ultimately a depressed state because I didn't feel like I could make the change I wanted to make, which led to a real sense of, you know, feeling an overall defeat and, things that are related to depression. And so to see the complexity, right, of our thoughts and the emotions, and then our sense of how we're going to respond, they're all so, this mind body spirit idea, connected to how we're living in the world, is so powerful to look through this lens and see all the ways we can affect change just by thinking we are responsible for our responses, and that's it.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we really
Hmm.
do. I mean, we often think about controlling our emotions,
Right,
and being responsible for our choices. But how
right,
often do we think about managing or being in control of our thoughts
right,
that
right.
influence our reactions or our emotions?
Right, right. And the cultivation. I like to think of I know I believe that I can't control my emotions, but I can cultivate the kind of emotional states I want to experience.
Oh,
And that's taking responsibility for my emotions, right? And my
yes,
emotional, the way I show up emotionally in the world.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so it's interesting, when you think about the words that we're using, I use
Yes.
manage, I use manage, we're using respond, we're using
Mm-hmm.
control, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we do, and being responsible for. So, you know, if I think about maybe the emotions are created by my thoughts, but how I am responding
Yeah.
to those emotions, right? How am I managing? How am I taking responsibility?
Right.
And I also think, how do I take responsibility for my thoughts? How do I cultivate
Mm-hmm.
thoughts that create responses that are more appropriate?
Yeah, I'll give a suggestion right now. So, for those of you with pen and paper, here's one for you because I used this one for myself, right? Was when I was really working on uh, changing my habit of ruminating over things I didn't have control over. For a while, I had kind of like a list of in my mind, and for a while, I think I even did it in my pocket on a piece of paper, which was 3 or 5 things that I could think about instead. So if I caught myself ruminating on something I could not change, had no control over, whether I was worrying about my brother or my sister and whatever they were doing, and I knew I couldn't help them or change their life or whatever, right? Instead, I'd catch myself thinking about that, and then I'd be like, okay, what can I think about instead, right? And so I had other things, like a list of other things. Oh, I can think about, you know, I've been practicing Tai Chi lately. I want to teach Tai Chi. Where might I teach? Well, how might I go? Like whatever it is I'm, currently thinking about that would feel productive and produce in me feelings of interest, excitement, enjoyment, adventure, whatever it is that I'm trying to cultivate, the feelings I'm trying to cultivate. And then you can actually, if you do that, if you actually take this practice on, right, and actually do that, what I've talked about, what I did, you can start to watch yourself going from feeling like helpless, powerless, sad, whatever, to wait a minute, I'm cultivating excitement, adventure, interest, wonder, curiosity, a trail of the next thing to do that I actually can do and accomplish, right? To make me feel satisfied with my life, productive in my day, or whatever it is that we want to
Yes.
feel or experience. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's very similar to, that practice that I use of what do I have to think or do to
Yeah.
to feel the way I want to feel, right?
And be the person I want to become.
That's
Right.
right.
Is that the rest of
Right.
that? Yeah. I
Yep.
love that
Yep.
one.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it is, I mean, sometimes when you're ruminating, right, and your thoughts have this control over you, you can
Mhm.
find a new thought.
Yeah.
It doesn't even have to be a new topic. I did this recently with hot weather. I'm not a hot
Mhm.
weather woman. I prefer it not to be too hot. And
Yeah.
so I found myself in a bad mood because I really, or I could see a mood coming because my
Mhm.
thoughts were, it is too hot. I don't like the heat. Where I
Yeah.
was like, snap out of it. What thought can I think to change the way I feel about this weather?
Yeah.
My new thought was, we only have a few days of this weather every summer, right? That
Yeah.
was a complete,
Right.
not a different topic. It wasn't what I would call a distraction, but just reframing the
Yes.
situation, right?
Mhm.
So there's
Mhm.
so many good ways to be
Right, right.
responsible for our thoughts.
Yes, and responsible to the situation at hand. So like I'll say, you know, for me, when I know it's a really hot day here, and I live in Virginia in a place where the summers are very hot, right? And I wake up and I can feel the mugginess literally in my body. I'm like, whoop, it's gonna be one of those days. And so I just do self-talk where I'm like, okay, you're going to move slowly through the day, Laurel. You're not going to over exercise. You're not going to, overeat. You're in between your engagements or responsibilities. You're going to take time to maybe just put your feet up and, read a book or just sip a cool drink and look out the window, like do whatever I need to do to take, that little mini self-care throughout the day on a day when it's not going to be an easy day for you because you're not going to feel great, right?
Well,
Yeah.
and what I love about the example you just gave is it really is a great example of being responsible to your reaction or for your reaction
Right.
to an external situation, right?
Right,
I mean,
right.
you managed you took responsibility for your reaction, your response to
Yeah.
knowing what the weather was going to be like that day, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know? So
Mhm.
that's a great example.
Yeah, yeah. I think that uh for people, particularly too, I want to come back to the ruminating thoughts idea
Yes.
because those ruminating thoughts can feel like they aren't under our control, can't they? Laurel,
Yes,
have you found that in your life? Yeah, I felt that too.
absolutely.
Yeah. And so what I want to say is ruminating thoughts. I always love this image. If you're a visionary person, this helps a little bit too. I always think of our brain, right, as like a record with all the grooves in it. And that needle is going over the records, playing the record again and again. And it's like there was a skip in the record. Remember in the days when you were playing records and a skip in the record, and it just kept playing the same thing over and over and over again, right? And it's like it was stuck there. And and so it got in because it got stuck there for whatever reason, it made a deep groove, right? And so the goal of ruminating thoughts is to realize that it's simply just a deep groove that was created over time, right? And the puzzle is how to get yourself out of that groove, hopefully for good, right?
Yeah.
And so there's so many ways of doing that. And one of them is that practice that I talked about. What can you think about instead? And then the other thing is taking time to really reflect and journal on what do you want in that situation? Because oftentimes when we're ruminating, we're focusing on what feels out of control. And
Yes.
we're not focusing on what the change is that we want. So to get yourself redirected towards what it is that you really want, and then what are the small steps you can start to take to try to bring about the change that you're looking for, or the communication that you want, or whatever. Just start to alter the ruminating thought, because now you're now even thinking differently about it, because you're adding in the what could I do instead, or what do I really want. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many reasons our brain does that. From it's
Mm-hmm.
a data processing system, right? And if
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
haven't found a solution to what we perceive to be a problem or a challenge, of course our brain is going to continue to look for an answer, a solution, a reason, and we will. I mean, it's just natural that we will ruminate. So
And a
I
good
love
thing. We want
it.
that,
Yeah, of
right? We
course.
don't want that to not be there. So it's not
No,
like we're trying to get rid of this processing system that we have, because
right.
there's some good stuff about it, right? We just don't want it
Yeah,
to be a detriment to our well-being.
that's
Yeah.
right. We don't want it to interfere with what we need,
Yeah.
what we should be doing, maybe, or thoughts that are more beneficial or productive. One of the ways
Yeah.
I do it, I really do. This is a practice that I did when I was working in corporate. Asking, can I do anything about this right now?
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer is yes, then do it, right? Take
Right.
action. If the
Good.
answer is no, then I file that dilemma, challenge, thought under,
Yeah.
an unfinished business column. Put it on paper somewhere. Keep a list,
Right.
because getting it out of our brain temporarily is
Yeah.
is good to do.
It's so good. And I feel like as a manager, right, in a managerial position, I love that tip. And I love then where I go from there, right? If it were me and I was doing, really taking full responsibility, I would, in that list of unfinished business, and if I felt like I couldn't do anything about it, I would make sure I was bringing it to somebody else who could affect change more than me, and to make sure that they knew it was on my radar.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And that you wanted to do something, but you didn't feel like it was under your jurisdiction or whatever. Because
Mhm.
I feel like, as we grow and we're taking more leadership for our lives, and we're doing this beautiful work, and seeing the benefits of it, is how do we then put that into practice in all the areas of our life, so we feel like not only are we leading our lives well, but we're feeling like a good leader in wherever we're showing up, right? And that feels so good. Feels Makes us feel really,
It
really
it really
confident.
does. It
Yeah.
does. And I wanted to bring up, when we're, going to the taking responsibility for your life, right? And
Mm,
transforming your life by taking responsibility. A few more
yeah.
things come up for me
Mm,
when tied to the ruminating, looking external, right? For the blame, the the
oh,
external reason, feeling powerless, like you have no choice in certain things, and
right.
how can we, get to a point where we start to realize the way that we're living, how we show up every day is a choice. Um, and that's hard, because we have to really kind of stop ourselves from living on autopilot, right?
Right. Right. Good.
And so, any thoughts come to mind
Yes.
for you?
Well, I'm so glad you went there, because the big thought that came for me as soon as you started talking about that was, any time that we feel like we are ruminating, and we don't feel like we can be responsible to make the change, and we feel ourselves or notice ourselves going into blaming mode, right? Is the trail of blaming will take you back to you feeling like a victim.
Hmm.
And for me, any place where we feel like we're a victim in our lives is worthy of transformational work, right? And so what is the step or steps that you can take so that you don't feel like a victim, or that you feel like you have to place blame out there, right? And so that always leads to communication, ultimately, of some kind, and making one small step, right? So that you feel like you're stepping up and taking some sense of responsibility for something that might not look or feel like it's it's about you or your responsibility, then at least have the conversation so that you're not holding it and feeling like you need to blame somebody. Like put it back over there and be like, not my thing anymore, right? I'm not going to hold that and feel like I have to blame that person. It's like, if I said, we're Democrats, we're Republicans. All the Democrats are, blaming the Republicans for this. All the Republicans are blaming the Democrats for that. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Who's going to ever solve that? Nobody's ever going to solve that if that's all it is, right? And so how do you step into that and feel like, I mean, for me, the only way to step in that is like, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican. I'm just an American who wants things to work better, And so I'm not even in the equation. I'm changing the whole paradigm of, I'm not blaming you. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying, look, let's do it differently. Let's come up with solutions that work for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting because what I hear in that example, no matter what the scenario is, it's really neutralizing the differences, right?
Yeah.
It's that piece of, we all can play the victim. We can all play the hero. We can all play, the master of
game.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All of it. Right.
Yeah.
And so when I think about that, starting with, it doesn't matter what role we're playing or what side of the equation or the problem we're on, the fact that we all have the same, what is alike? What is alike with us? What's the same with us? Right.
What's our common endeavor?
That's right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right,
What's our commonality?
Yeah.
And starting from there, right, to kind of neutralize that. And then the other thing I think about oftentimes when there are times when I find myself looking for a reason, right? What is the root cause? We used to call it in corporate safety. What's the root cause? Oftentimes the root cause, we don't want it to be with ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that question of, what is it about this that I don't want to own? Why do I need an external reason? Often if blame is an external reason. So it's good stuff or bad stuff, right? But what is it about the situation that it makes me so uncomfortable? I don't want to be responsible for this.
Yeah.
Good.
That was great. So we could stay in that discussion for a really long time, but I think that's time for us to wrap up, Laurel. So
I think so too.
But I hope that our listeners really found some value in some of our ideas and some of our exercises that we tossed out there today, because I do feel like hopefully we didn't overload you with ideas of things to do, but I hope we inspired you really to feel like taking responsibility for your life is only a good thing and nothing intimidating or heavy. It doesn't have to be any longer.
No, right? It doesn't. And it's just one small step to increase your awareness on how and why you take responsibility, I think is beautiful. It's a good place to start with that inner work.
It is. Thanks, Laurel, for our conversation today. It was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
I did too. I think we need to talk about this some more in another podcast.
Too. I do. I wonder what our follow-up topic will be. We'll find out. We'll let you know as we go forward. All right, listeners, we're off.
Okay,
Thanks, Laurel.
bye.
See you next time. Bye for now.